Hey Defenders, welcome back. So in this video I wanted to discuss Windows SYSMON utility and kind of a brief overview of what it is, what it does, and how it can better enhance our Wazuh platform. But first, time for my shameless plug. If you want to learn more about our company, head on over to opensecure.co. If you would like to hire us for a project, select the Hire Us button at the top of this video. To see firsthand the power of open source technology, take advantage of our interactive demo. Select the demo button and start exploring. Now let's get back to the video. SYSMON is a system service that is developed by Microsoft themselves. It doesn't come pre-installed as default, so we'll need to install it, but thankfully it is a pretty easy configuration. And what SYSMON captures is, so we're already receiving Windows events into our Wazuh manager by default, right? But Windows SYSMON takes the Windows events that we're currently getting and basically puts them on steroids. So Windows SYSMON will be responsible and will alert on process creation, process terminations, network connections, file creations, remote threads, disk access, and much more. So it takes, and then what we're able to do with the Wazuh agent that's running on the Windows box is pump these logs over to our Wazuh manager for some analysis and give us a much deeper look into what's going on onto all of our Windows hosts. So let's go ahead and jump into that. So first we'll need to install SYSMON. If you just Google SYSMON install, the first link should take you to Microsoft's documentation, and I'll go ahead and get on my Windows box that I have connected to our manager. So we'll go ahead and download the zip file here, and let me go ahead and open this up in another let me go ahead and extract this. All right, and so now we have the basic executable installed, but SYSMON kind of similar to what Linux is with Audit D capability. If you haven't seen that last video, I'll link to it now. But like Linux's Audit D service, we also need to configure rules for SYSMON. So like Audit D, it needs, just having the executable isn't enough. We need to upload a rules file that will tell SYSMON what we want it to alert on. So thankfully there's a really good GitHub page that's done by this SwiftOn security guy and has a really good template for SYSMON configurations and from a information security standpoint, and it's pretty frequently updated. As you can see, this one was last updated 13 days ago, and saves us a lot of headache of having to create our own rules. So it's, of course, we like with Audit D, we also have the ability to create our own, but this is a really good template to start from. So I'll just go ahead and copy this guy, and we will call this XML file during the installation of SYSMON. So what I'll go ahead and do is just copy all of this in a text editor. I'll just throw it into Notepad. Let's see if syntactically it looks okay. Yep, it looks good. And I'll go ahead and save it. I believe it needs to be as a .xml. Yep. So I'll go ahead and save it as, let me throw it in my folder. Go ahead and save it as config.xml. Okay, so that should be saved. Let me just verify that. Yep, that looks good. All right, and then we'll open up command prompt as administrator. Oh, jumped the gun. Run command prompt as administrator. We'll navigate to our directory here where we have the executable in our config file, and we'll just run a simple SYSMON. Go ahead and give it the 64 since this is a 64-bit, and then a -i, and then we'll point to our XML file, which is just config.xml. So we'll go ahead and run that. I went ahead and installed SYSMON and also loaded in our configuration file and validated that for us. And what's nice about SYSMON is it doesn't require any reboot either when you're either installing or uninstalling SYSMON, which is nice. So you can apply this to production Windows boxes without having to schedule any downtime to reboot the box, which is nice. All right, so we have that installed. So SYSMON also logs to Event Viewer. So if we go ahead and open this up, go down to Applications and Services, expand Microsoft, expand Windows. If we scroll down, we'll have a SYSMON log, and we'll go ahead and open up this operational. And here we can see, similar to the security Windows Event Viewer, they funnel in like so. They also have event IDs that correlate to specific events. So like a 1 is a process creation, a 13 is a registry value was set, a 5 was a process was terminated. So you can already kind of get a good idea at how robust of log collection that SYSMON is able to do. We get DNS queries, and just a wealth of information that we can use during our investigations. All right, but unfortunately we are still not done yet. So what we now need to do is we need to send these logs to our Wazuh manager, and we also need to make some Wazuh rules that'll capture these new logs that are coming into us. And respond to those, and be able to categorize those accordingly. So first we need to send these logs to our manager. So what we can do is we could do it on the agent itself. I'm going to go ahead and go through the UI here. So I'll select on this group that this agent is a part of, and what this will allow me to do, management and groups, I can edit the group configuration. And so what we're doing is similar to how we forward logs on like Linux managers and Windows Event Viewer. We're doing something similar here. We just have to state to pass the SYSMON and the operational log. So if we go back to our Event Viewer, we follow a similar path, right? So if you kind of look at, location is Microsoft-Windows. So we come into Microsoft, right? We explore down to the Windows folder. We then drop down to the SYSMON folder in just a sec here. And then we're loading the operational logs in, right? So that's kind of it's kind of a more unfamiliar path, but this is how we tell the Windows Wazuh agent, hey, these are the logs I want you to grab, and the log format is within an event channel. PowerShell logs, for example, are another good log collection to enable. You can, and we'll do that here in a few videos coming up, but that'll allow us to log in detail all PowerShell commands that have been ran on a Windows box, which is very powerful as well. All right, and so we have that set up, so we'll go ahead and save. All right, and so now that we have SYSMON installed, we are forwarding the logs to our manager. Now we need to implement some SYSMON rules on our manager so that we log the events that we are now capturing from SYSMON. So if we go into management and go into the rules file here, by default, so they do provide some rules by default. However, you can see so the rules will fire off of the event right? That's similar kind of to the SYSMON XML configuration that we have, right? So if we look at our event viewer, we see that the event ID column comes in, right? So, and those specify different categories. So where we see SYSMON event 1, that would reflect to SYSMON event ID as to 1, right? So that's kind of how we're making that correlation. But you can see in Wazuh, by default, they're set to a level of 0. So which would mean that the logs would hit our manager, but our manager wouldn't trigger it as a rule, so it wouldn't log it within Elasticsearch, and then we couldn't use Kibana to see that. So we're going to go ahead and make our own rules file. So if we go into Manage Rule Files, and then we'll go into Custom Rules, and you see I just have the local _rules.xml. So I'll go ahead and add a new rules file. We'll call it sysmon.xml. With Wazuh, you need to end your file name with .xml, so it needs to be a .xml, or otherwise Wazuh will freak out on you and not like it. And then I'll go ahead and paste the SYSMON rules in. I'll put a link to my GitHub in the description that contains this, so you guys can easily just grab this. But essentially what we're doing is we're just taking the rule ID that Wazuh has configured, so 61603, and you can see that that relates to a SYSMON event ID of 1. And so we're taking that and setting it now to a level 5 instead of a level 0. So that way we'll now actually get the events to populate within our GUI here. So I'll select all those, paste it in here, go ahead and save this file. And it should come back clean. Okay, then we'll go ahead and restart. The manager needs to be restarted with every rule change. And then once that is done, we will jump back onto the Windows agent and see if we can trigger some alerts. And all right, so we're restarted. So the best way to trigger off some alerts, I mean, we could manually run some commands, but there's a really cool tool by these Nextron system guys called a APT simulator, APT standing for Advanced Persistent Threat. And it basically simulates your Windows box getting infected. And it's a really cool tool to test your antivirus solution, your host intrusion detection solution, your network monitoring solution as well, to see, to ensure that you're alerting and catching what you should be catching, right? So this is a good tool to mimic malicious traffic without, actually downloading a malicious file, which is cool. And it's pretty easy to run. I'll go ahead and select releases and go ahead and download their zip file. You'll probably have to turn off browser security. I had to do that for this. Within Chrome, if you just go into settings, privacy and security, and go into site settings. Go into security. I set mine to no protection. And you'll probably need to do that, or else Chrome will block it from being downloaded. And it looks like, maybe Windows Defender is flagging it now too. Let's see. So it looks like I also need to remove Defender. See if I can turn this off. Okay, here we go. All right, so also turning off that guy. Okay, let's try this again. All right, looks like we got it there. Okay, cool. So I'll go ahead and extract it. I'll extract it here. And it's really easy to run. We'll just open a command prompt as admin, and I'll navigate to the directory where it's stored. And then they have a handful of tools within here that they call, but all we have to do is run this bat file. So we'll just hit enter on this. It'll ask us if we want to proceed. We'll go ahead and say yeah. Techniques that would be used with malware or a malicious actor on your network. So they categorize that accordingly here. I'll just go ahead and run 0 to run every test. And we just hit enter and it goes off and does its thing. I suspect some of these will probably fail, but that's okay. This should be enough for this demo. You can see it's running curl to access some well-known command and control domains, right? It's trying to access websites with a malicious user agent, right? It's looking to drop Mimikatz. I suspect some of it looks like some of these are failing, but that's fine. We should have enough now so if we were like to refresh this guy, yeah, we're starting to get a lot of events in now, which is good. So now, you can see really the benefit too of Wazuh and having this log collection tool, because who would want to manually go through all these to try to pick out the bad stuff, right? Granted, you do get all your details, but this is a big eyesore and it'd be very easy to miss something. So if we go back into our Wazuh agent here, let's see if we're getting some alerts start to come in. And okay, cool, it looks like we are. So those are getting categorized for us. So I'll go ahead and filter on the rule group SYSMON. Let's open up the events tab. And so here you can see our custom rules are starting to come in, right? So the notepad that I had, right, where I already had these built out for us, but we can see our rule IDs are being reflected, right? So 100,000 or 101,101, 101,102. We can see those starting to come in, and that's based upon the event number, which correlates to the event ID number that you see here. All right, so let's see if we can see what's going on. So we get some process creations, some terminations. We're seeing DNS queries. Let's see. We're seeing some file creations, right? We're seeing. Looks like PowerShell is being called to run on a PowerShell script. And let's see if we can correlate some of these events to what actually happened. So if we go back to this guy, let's see some of the where were some of those DNS queries at? Okay, here we go. So creating DNS cache entries for well-known malicious C2 servers. Okay, let's look for chicken killer. Okay, let's go back into and since we know it's a DNS query, we can just filter on the DNS queries here. And we'll go ahead and parse out the query name. So we see some other domains that are coming through, as well as the image. And this image is cool, right? Because this is telling you what program is actually making the query, right? Which is really nice and really insightful. So I know that, hey, Chrome made a query out to whatever the heck this thing is, right? We see me going out to GitHub. Looks like it's not able to get the process for that one, for whatever reason. Not totally sure why. But let's see if we can find chicken killer. Yep, here we go. So we can see that the curl exe, right, called or made a query for this chicken killer domain. Right, and then we also see the full path that the executable is in, right? So if we saw something like this on our box, that'd be a huge red flag as to this box is compromised and is reaching out to do some nefarious things or to get something very nefarious. So that's and you can see the wealth of information that SYSMON is bringing in, right? It brings in so much that we can then start to create our own rules off of. We can create a dashboard that allows us to view all these SYSMON events going on within my network. Maybe I like to review DNS queries that are made, every so often. We could start to really get sophisticated and start to automate DNS queries, so we could compare DNS queries made against a list of known malicious domains, right? And that we have the ability to do that with Wazuh. That'll be a topic covered in a later Wazuh video, as it is a little more advanced, but that just gives you a hint of some of the sophistication we can do with Wazuh and how we can really automate this process rather than manually going through all these logs. Because even though now that we're starting to get these in a central location, we see how much it can be, right? So even so, it can still become really quickly overwhelming. So it'd be nice to have a way to cover this in some intelligence, right? And we can see some registry changes, and we get just a wealth of information here, which is really great to collect, especially if you're needing to kind of do some root cause as to maybe you had a box that was infected, but you were running SYSMON, you were capturing PowerShell commands, which we'll go over in a later video as well. Even though your box was compromised, or maybe it's a box that has been compromised, you just didn't know about it, and then all of a sudden you see a curl command out to a malicious domain, we now have a root cause as to how did the malware get onto the box, and what did the malware try to do once it was on the box. So now we're taking Windows Event Viewer that comes kind of by default, right? And there's its own security. So we have, within Windows Event Viewer, there's the security logs, but that's really but that's not as robust as, an InfoSec team would need to have, right? This gives us like user logons and things like that, but that's nowhere near as sophisticated as what SYSMON provides us, and SYSMON is much more granular, and you can really dive down into the weeds of what's going on your boxes, which is a great tool to have. So I appreciate you guys spending the time with me, and I will see you in the next video. And as always, let me know down below what you liked or disliked about this video, any errors I may have made, as well as recommendations for other open source tools you think I should explore.